Hello, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon, depending on your location. This is Brooke Akins, and on behalf of Q1 Productions and Celegence, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar and thank you for joining us. Today's webinar will discuss how to start preparing your regulatory and quality affairs teams for the EUDAMED database. We're very lucky to have Mr. John Bradsher, who is a medical device regulatory affairs and quality expert at Celegence with us today. And John will be covering the various modules within the EUDAMED database. He'll be discussing some of the nuances of the UDI. And finally, he'll be providing insight on the expectations for clinical evaluation documentation. Again, we're thrilled to be partnering with Celegence on today's webinar. And John will be joined by his colleague, Diana Taylor, who is a medical device expert specializing in quality and regulatory compliance, later to address some of the questions submitted by today's audience and provide further insight. Please note that a copy of today's recording will be sent to all registered attendees upon completion of today's webinar. There will also be an opportunity to submit further questions to the presenters via the Q&A option on your RingCentral toolbar, and you can do this at any time during the presentation, but please note that these questions will be answered by the Celegence team at a later date. We have saved a few minutes after today's presentation to address some of the questions and comments that you all submitted, which we greatly appreciate. Thank you again to all of the attendees and participants for submitting your questions. Without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Celegence's Dylan Mulvihill, who will formally introduce today's speaker, again, Dr. John Bradsher. And right now I'd like to welcome and introduce Dylan.
Welcome everyone to today's webcast, and thank you for joining. My name is Dylan Mulvihill, and I'm an associate at Celegence. And joining me for today's presentation will be my colleague and medical device regulatory expert, John Bradsher. Now, today's agenda includes an introduction about Celegence from myself, followed by our feature presentation from John. This will include modules of EUDAMED with early impact, product types of immediate concern, and the responsibilities of economic operators. Immediately at the conclusion of our 40-minute presentation, there will be an additional 20 to 30 minutes for our Q&A panel. Now, to provide you with a background on Celegence, we were formed in 2017 with the intent of improving quality and compliance while reducing costs for the life sciences industry in the area of regulatory affairs. We serve some of the top global companies in both the device and pharmaceutical sectors. We provide niche regulatory affairs services such as MDR gap analysis, CER writing, device registrations, and other operational and strategic activities required for global device compliance. Now, as you can see on the map here, our offices are located in Chicago, London, and Bangalore, India. Our delivery center in India, combined with our large network of device experts, allows us to provide an onshore-offshore model to our clients, which ensures both high quality and cost efficiency. Here you can see our team's expertise in many areas of medical device RA and QA. We have worked with multiple clients in many therapeutic areas, as you can see here. We're also developing technology to improve efficiency in the EU MDR compliance operations, specifically focusing on clinical evaluation report writing with the guidance of our internal team and subject matter expert network. But now I would like to pass things along to my colleague, John Bradsher, for our featured EUDAMED presentation. Thank you, and over to you, John.
Thank you, Dylan, for that introduction. And my name is John Bradsher, and I will walk you through the requirements and the availability of EUDAMED over the next 40 minutes. My background is strong in both basic science and in biotechnology, in addition to my mastery of regulatory and quality areas. Over the last many years, and I've worked on products in EU risk classes 1 through 3 during those years of experience. Today we will discuss modules detailed in Articles 27, 29, 31, 92, and 100. We will briefly discuss EUDAMED modules that are detailed in Articles 57 and 73. Now, those are the EU MDR article designations, and where I can throughout, I will provide correlated in vitro diagnostic regulation article designations as well. So many of you may be familiar with the notice of full functionality of EUDAMED, which is not expected until Q4 of 2022, a full 2 years off, and that is actually dependent upon a successful audit in mid-year 2022. So there could be things that even put off that delayed benchmark. One of the questions that we will then address today is how you as manufacturers are expected to comply with various deadlines that take effect well before that date of full functionality of EUDAMED. Now, this slide gives us an overview of some of the functionalities of EUDAMED, not all of which will have immediate effect on that date of applicability. From the 12 o'clock position around the rosette, we have first the electronic system on certificates. This is the Article 57 obligation from the MDR correlated to the Article 52 from the in vitro diagnostic regulation. This is the module that will contain declarations of conformity, summaries of safety and clinical performance, and your listing of designated notified bodies. This will have content that is intended to be public-facing, including your summaries of safety and clinical performance, as well as much content that is not intended to be facing the public. Moving around the rosette, we have the electronic system on vigilance. This is the Article 92 obligation correlated to Article 87 in the in vitro diagnostic regulation. It will contain your post-market surveillance update reports and reports of field safety corrective actions and serious incidents. This module will also have a mix of public-facing and non-public-facing information. Moving on around the rosette, we have the electronic system on market surveillance. This is your Article 100 obligation, correlated to the Article 95 from the in vitro diagnostic regulation. This is where you will find your final inspection reports for all economic operators in the supply chain and information on non-compliant products and on products that have unacceptable risks to health and safety. And moving around to the final position, we have the electronic system on clinical investigations. This is the Article 73 obligation and correlated with the Article 69, the in vitro diagnostic regulation, where it's called the electronic system on performance investigations. This is a module that the legal manufacturer will use if performing clinical or performance investigations in the EU. The module will generate single identification numbers for clinical investigations. Most of the information that is on this module will not be available to the public. Now, if we move to the right, we've considered most of these document-oriented elements to the left. We also have registration requirements, which are shown a little bit here in the middle of the screen. This is a group of modules that will include both the registration of economic operators, which is Article 31 in the MDR, Article 28 in the Ivdr, the registration of devices, which is Article 29 in the MDR, Article 26 in the Ivdr, and the buddy database, which is Article 27 or 24 in the Ivdr. These modules for registration are said to be slated for availability in late 2020, which should give us about 5 months in advance for compliance with the registration requirements for EUDAMED in advance of the date of applicability in May of 2021, excuse me. Now, moving along to registration. This is the Article 29 obligation from the MDR, Article 26 from the Ivdr. The buddy is a data element that has got a lot of attention and has created some anxiety along the way. And without getting into too much detail, the buddy, like the UDI, is a package of attribute data. Both will have places that they will be used in common, like in, for instance, regulatory submissions shown here, but each will have unique places that the information is displayed. So for instance, your buddy will be found on declarations of conformity and on summaries of safety and clinical performance, while a UDI is the type of data you'll find on primary product labels, implant cards, and vigilance communication. So graphically, we have UDI, which is broken up into two parts. It essentially contains a concatemer of the UDI-DI, the device identifier, and the UDI-PI, the product identifier. And these will be provided for reporting serious incidents and field safety corrective actions and provided to patients receiving implants under the MDR. Now, the economic operators in your supply chain are going to be obliged to maintain electronic records of the buddy for Class 3 and implantable devices, as well as devices that will be detailed in any implementing act yet to be published. This is an obligation on the economic operators that is reflected as well with health institutions throughout the EU, as they will also be compelled to maintain buddy records for all Class 3 and implantables, as well as devices detailed in implementing acts. There is an element of the unknown here in the respect that member states, as stakeholders, may encourage or require healthcare institutions to maintain records of buddies for all devices. And this is a very closely watched area because it would mean so much of an increase in the amount of effort necessary to be compliant with regulation for registration. We are definitely waiting to see where the various different jurisdictions land on this, and I can encourage you to stay in touch with Celegence, who will help keep you notified and help you navigate through the unknown with respect to this type of jurisdiction-specific requirement that may be emerging over the next many months. Now, for those of you interested in marketing in the UK, including Britain, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, the MHRA has issued requirements for products of all classes to be registered with the UK as well. And this is going to be actually necessary for those who haven't got an alternate means of completing it by the end of the year of 2020. Grace periods for Class 3 and Class 2 devices have already passed, and that one for the Class 1 devices will pass at the end of December. This legal requirement to register will not affect you if you have an existing relationship with an authorized representative within the UK. Be aware, however, that this is guidance that is based on the concept of a hard Brexit at the end of December of 2020. And as December 31st approaches, things may change. There may be a trade agreement. The MHRA may provide additional further guidance. Suffice it to say, this is an area that's being closely watched as well. And Celegence can help keep you up to date on the requirements as they become public. I'd now like to move on to product types of immediate concern. So specifically, products that will be marketed on directive certificates after the date of applicability in the EU will be regarded as legacy devices. The MDR does not specifically require buddies on legacy devices, but the EU Commission has essentially detailed a two-part workaround. First, registration will be necessary according to the 29 requirement, Article 29 that is, but it will be possible to complete that registration in the absence of a buddy using other attribute data, including your UDIs. Now, moving forward with that kind of approach, legal manufacturers will bear a certain amount of risk in the respect that if there is a field safety corrective action that occurs with such a legacy device, which has not been registered by its buddy, the affected device must be then immediately registered at the moment of reporting of the serious incident or field safety corrective action. So it looks like the European Commission is preparing an on-demand system to handle such events even before the registration system is available on a broader basis for legacy devices. Now, in contrast to what we just discussed, we will now consider the requirements for devices placed initially on the regulation certificates, that is, under the MDR or Ivdr. Now, what we see here in this slide is a concept of the end of the window of opportunity to have your buddies displayed on your packaging, on your labeling and higher levels of packaging. And that occurs in even numbered years, as shown above the register for MDR compliant devices in a reducing risk kind of format. And it occurs in odd numbered years below the register for in vitro diagnostic regulated devices. The current dates of applicability for the MDR are May of 2021 for the MDR and May of 2022 for the Ivdr. Because those are only a single year separated, we have this resulting alternation in the dates that the buddy requirements will be met for each of the affected risk classes for affected devices. Now, there are many reasons that as a legal manufacturer, you may choose to be active much earlier than these deadlines in assigning your buddies. Specifically, the application to the notified body for conformity assessment is contingent upon completing of assignments of your various different products to buddy and to buddy groups. And so many legal manufacturers are currently active, grouping their devices into various different buddy groups so that they can proceed with the negotiation that's necessary with your notified body in order to determine how many technical files will need to be audited for each group of devices. And those kinds of early moving determinants are going to be the sort of things that many legal manufacturers are currently active with. So don't be swayed to believe that you can wait until these deadlines are near in order to be active on this type of activity. Now there are a few product types that deserve special attention today considering the buddy requirements, and I'd like to talk about software as a medical device. As indicated here, the only software that is subject to UDI requirements is that which is commercially available on its own or which constitutes a standalone device. So if the software is an integral component of your device, such instances would be free from the UDI requirement. As indicated here, a new UDI is required in instances when you have a modification that changes the original performance, the safety of the software, or the interpretation of the data. It can also be required whenever you have a change that could result in misidentification of your device or an ambiguity in its traceability. So graphically, that is shown here. Things that trigger a new UDI include changes in your buddy, changes that impact performance, safety or interpretation of your data, but also things that are changes of your trade name or other, your proper names or trade names, your version or model number, warnings or contraindications, and changes to the interface language. Now, things that are minor software changes, including bug fixes, would not rise to the level of requiring a new buddy assignment, although they would require a new product identifier of the UDI type. However, if such a change rises to the level that it is a security patch or an enhancement to the operating efficiency of the software, that would revert to the type of UDI triggering major change, which would also be necessary to submit in a significant change notice. Now, many of you will be interested in marketing in the UK post-Brexit, and as we get closer to the end of 2020, it looks more likely that we may be dealing with a hard Brexit at the end of the year. And as we discussed previously, the MHRA has been providing guidance on this subject. One of the things that is clear that will be introduced is a new conformity assessment mark called the UK CA mark. This will be a homologue, if you will, of the EU CE mark for conforming devices. This will be necessary for those of you interested in marketing in the UK for all devices after the midpoint of 2023, June 30th. In order to obtain and to apply such a mark, you're going to require a UK approved notified body and audit in order to get the certificate and to fix the UK CA mark on your labeling and device. Now, they have provided an allowance for those of you that may need a bit of time to comply with this requirement, and so specifically, they are allowing manufacturers with current EU certificates that are either issued under the directive or the regulation that is MDD, IVDD, or AIMDD, or MDR, or Ivdr certificates. Those will remain valid in the UK up to the mid-year point of 2023. So we'll have some time to comply with this, this regulation before it takes effect. However, for new products that are going to be introduced to the UK after the end of 2020, these will now require separate audits and conformity assessments, except for products that are in the Class 1 self-declared groups. Now, moving on to the remaining EUDAMED requirements, we have vigilance and post-market surveillance. This is your Article 92 from the MDR obligation, and that correlates with the Article 87 from the Ivdr. This is where you will find reports of non-serious incidents, reports of serious incidents and field safety corrective actions, no doubt, as described in Articles 87 and 89. And this is a good moment for us to remember that we are going to be on a shorter reporting time regime in the coming year. So specifically, we are currently at 30 days under the current MedDef 2.1-2 guideline, and we will be moving to a 15-day reporting time for incidents and serious events, effective on May 26th of 2021. This includes legacy devices, and we should note also that field safety corrective actions will be reportable without undue delay. This is also the module where you will find reports of trends in non-serious incidents or expected undesirable side effects that could have a significant impact on the benefit risk analysis for your devices. This brings us to the final module on EUDAMED, the System for Market Surveillance. This is the Article 100 obligation correlated to the Article 95 from the EU MDR diagnostic regulation. Now, I regard this as the final module in the respect that they're called out by the regulation in terms of article numbers. However, it is expected to be one of the earlier available modules for functionality and use by the legal manufacturer community. This is where you will find final inspection reports on economic operators in the supply chain, information on devices with an unacceptable profile for risk to health and safety, information on non-compliant products, and information on preventive health measures. Now, this will be a module that has access that is primarily to notified bodies, competent authorities, and the EU Commission, but not to the public, with possible exception of those kinds of information that are intended to be helpful to prevent public health, to promote public health protection. We'll now move on to the responsibilities of economic operators. And so we'll start with the supply chain. So at this time, legal manufacturers are compelled to identify distributors and importers in their supply chains and to establish responsibilities with each of them. They are compelled to identify also authorized representatives and along with importers and distributors to create provisions to assure traceability for both upstream and downstream provision. That is, those from which they have received devices and those to which they have supplied devices within their supply chain to the competent authorities for 10 years after the last device is placed on the market. With that obligation actually changing to 15 years in the instance that you're marketing an implantable device. The legal manufacturer and its economic operators must all cooperate with distributors and importers to achieve an appropriate level of traceability. The completion of the requirement for registration of economic operators is expected by your date of application in May of 2021. And we now know that the EUDAMED registration module for economic operators will be available from late 2020 to allow us about 5 months for completion of this requirement. Now, for manufacturers, most of these requirements may look very familiar to those of you who have been marketing in the EU on MDD certificates, and many of these you would regard as essential components for quality management. So specifically, legal manufacturers are expected to establish and document a system of risk management. They're compelled to make provisions and keep copies of technical documentation, declarations of conformity, and certificates available to competent authorities for at least 10 years after the last device is placed on the market, with that obligation changing to 15 years in the case that you market implantable devices. Manufacturers are expected to establish, document, implement, maintain, keep up to date, and continuously improve quality management systems that are proportionate to their risk class, with the exception of investigation devices. Legal manufacturers are expected to plan, establish, document, implement, maintain, and update a post-market surveillance system based on a post-market surveillance plan, including your technical documentation, with the exception of custom-made devices. They're expected to establish a method for reporting incidents and field safety corrective actions, as described in the relevant articles. And at this time, if they have not also already done so, legal manufacturers should consider taking out liability insurance. Now, on that topic, in the EU, under the MDR, legal manufacturers will be sharing legal responsibility for liability with authorized representatives. So it goes likewise to authorized representatives to be considering at this time, if they have not already done so, to consider taking out liability insurance. The completion of these requirements is expected for you to complete them by the date you've designated for your QMS audit for your manufacturer's MDR certification. Moving on to requirements for your authorized representative. These are fewer, but nonetheless important. Authorized representatives, well, legal manufacturers are expected to essentially designate their ARs and to agree upon a mandate and responsibilities with their authorized representatives. They are expected to ensure that the authorized representatives have permanent access to all documentation required to fulfill their tasks, and they must define modalities in their agreement between the manufacturer and both incoming and outgoing authorized representatives in the event of a changeover for authorized representation. Now, suffice it to say, these have all been specific focus of a lot of discussion, particularly the availability of permanent access to documentation, particularly because legal manufacturers regard this as intellectual property and proprietary under many circumstances. So many legal manufacturers are currently negotiating with the notified bodies whether they can provide access to redacted copies or copies of technical documentation that would, in their estimation, be sufficient to fulfill all the required tasks, but would not give technical documentation availability to the full suite of intellectual property from the manufacturer. So this is the time for you to be considering those kinds of aspects of the agreements that you're going to be making with your authorized representative. Now, the person responsible for regulatory compliance is a new role identified by the EU MDR, and the responsibilities of the manufacturer include that for large and medium manufacturers, they are compelled to appoint a person in their organization as a person responsible for regulatory compliance, and they must have demonstrated expertise. So it comes down to education and training, essentially. Manufacturers that are smaller, including small and micro manufacturers, have the option to use an outside resource to designate a person responsible for regulatory compliance. But on that note, please be aware that changes in your person responsible for regulatory compliance will be regarded as significant changes by your notified body. So you may want to think carefully about the benefits and risks of having a third-party nominee for your PRRC, specifically if it means you're going to have that person changing over the course of the next many years, as each change will be processed with a significant change notice. This requirement for your PRRC's registration is expected by the date of applicability, the 26th of May of next year. And we now know that the registration elements will be available in late 2020, so we'll have many months to do this in advance of the deadlines. You should expect to be done with this step of registration for your authorized representatives and your person responsible for regulatory compliance by the date that you have determined with your notified body for your manufacturer's MDR certification audit. So this brings us full circle. We've had time to discuss many topics today. And as time permits, we'll have a few minutes now. We can talk about a couple of the modules that we didn't previously discuss, including the Article 57, Electronic System on Certificates, and the Article 73, Electronic System on Clinical and Performance Investigation. Now, as we discussed previously, the first is the Electronic System on Certificates. That's Article 57, that's Article 52 in the EU Ivdr that describes the requirements for this. That's where you're going to find your certificates for your declarations of conformity, for instance, and summaries of safety and clinical performance. There will also be a part of that, a module that will contain the current list of designated notified bodies and how they're designated for each regulation. That brings us to the Electronic System on Clinical and Performance Investigation. So this is where the two regulations diverge a little in regard that, okay, so in the MDR, it's called clinical investigations. In the Ivdr, it's performance investigations. These are under Article 73 in the MDR and Article 68 in the Ivdr. But nonetheless, this is the module where you're going to log on to get a single identification number in the event that you're performing either clinical or performance investigations in the EU. So that's going to be a go-to resource for those of you in that situation. Now, these two modules are expected to not be available by the date of applicability, and we currently are keeping a close eye on when they may be made available because there are certainly many development projects that are ongoing that will be depending upon this type of functionality. Celegence can be a very good resource for you to continue to stay up to date and help you navigate through this path as you're moving forward in the next many months towards compliance with EU MDR. So this brings us full circle. Today we've discussed many topics, including EUDAMED, including UDIs,
And I'm going to stop our presenter, John, right there, as we have covered many topics today, and we are going to open it up for Q&A. Again, I know people have been submitting questions throughout, which we certainly appreciate. I'm going to invite our speakers and panelists to turn on their cameras while I pull up our slides for the Q&A portion here. Again, thank you to all attendees for submitting your questions in advance. We certainly do appreciate it. Again, and I want to welcome back our presenter, again, Dr. John Bradsher, and we're also joined by Diana Taylor, his colleague who's an expert, as well as Celegence's Dylan Mulvihill. Welcome again to all of our Celegence participants, and thank you again for the excellent presentation. Again, to all of our wonderful attendees, you have submitted questions that we'll be addressing now, but please continue to submit your questions in the Q&A function, and the Celegence team will get back to you at a later date. We appreciate all of the questions and comments and look forward to addressing them. Again, to our panelists, welcome. I'm happy to jump right into the Q&A. John, again, welcome. The first question we have here is for you. Who are the accredited agencies for issuing UDI to the manufacturers in the EU?
Right, so there are currently 4 designated entities that can issue UDIs. Their designations are GS1, AISBL, the HIBCC, which stands for the Health Industry Business Communications Council, the ICCBBA, and the newest one, which is called IFA GmbH.
Lovely, thank you so much for that. Another great question that came through from our attendees, and John, your perspective, please. How and when do the manufacturers need to contact and establish a process for obtaining UDI details? So again, how and when do the manufacturers need to contact and establish a process for obtaining UDI details?
So this is a little bit of a matter of personal choice, but I think that the wisdom is to act sooner rather than later. And this is the kind of thing that as you'll be working with a third party, it all comes through discussion of the details with your notified body and a bit of negotiation. It will depend on the size of the ask. If you've got hundreds to thousands of UDIs, it could be that there are significant lengths of time that could be involved in that. And so I would be reluctant to give you a hard figure for an amount of time that could be used, you know, to help budget. Suffice to say, work in advance and try to get it done sooner rather than later. And there's no time like the present.
Great advice. Thank you so much. Another great question that came through, and I was just skimming again, Celegence has been kind enough to provide us with a copy of today's recording, which I will be sending out to all registered attendees upon completion, but please do keep sending through the questions. Diana Taylor, again, welcome. Thank you. This question is for you. How often does UDI information need to be updated for a specific device or device family? If you wouldn't mind speaking to that.
Yeah, sure. I thought John did a great job on talking about some of the UDI requirements and when changes are needed. Certainly, the objective of the regulation is to make sure that we have complete traceability for our devices. So anytime there are changes that could lead to a misidentification of the device or ambiguity in the traceability, you would need to update your UDI. And so that could be changes to the name or the trade name, maybe a change to a version or model number, adding new indications or changing your indications or your intended purpose might also warrant an update to your UDI, adding or making a change to a critical contraindication or warning, such as, you know, maybe there's a material of concern warning that will be affecting whether or not you need to update the UDI, and any significant product design change. Again, if there's any materials of concern, for example, that are involved in the change that might affect your UDI and require update. And if you're adding a new size, like a new pack size that you're going to be marketing, then you will need to update your UDI. And as John mentioned, also software as a device will have some additional requirements for what will require an update on your UDI. So any changes that are going to impact the performance, safety, or interpretation of the data for your software device, any changes to the user interface language, and again, any changes that could lead to a misidentification of a device or any ambiguity in their traceability, you'll need to update your UDI.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Diana. Moving right along to the next question, which is for John. John, what are the language-specific label requirements from the UDI perspective?
All right, so a very careful look at Annex 6 of the MDR indicates that there are no language requirements for labels as far as the UDI is concerned. And over the last many years, the trend in regulatory affairs has been to increasingly use standardized icons in addition to core data elements in order to reduce variation in product labels, thus improving the accuracy, the possibility of accurate labeling for devices worldwide. And the UDI requirement is actually consistent with this principle by introducing an alphanumeric code in addition to the AIDC barcode. So, you know, even though these will be unique, the format is relatively unchanged, and it's certainly alphanumeric. It will stay in that format. By contrast, the database will be available in all of the official languages of the EU. So this will actually help people in various different jurisdictions be able to effectively use the functionality of the database in their own local language.
Lovely. Thank you so much for that, John. We appreciate the clarification. Moving right along, and thank you so much for submitting the questions. Yes, we are recording the Q&A as well, so all attendees will get a recorded copy of our Q&A. Thank you for submitting those questions, but moving right along. John, what is the difference between MDR UDI requirements and Ivdr UDI requirements? Great question there. Again, differences between MDR UDI and Ivdr UDI.
Well, really, it comes down, I think, to the date of applicability of each regulation. Both the MDR and the Ivdr set deadlines for compliance that are
Oh, I think John's connection might have been lost. John, are you still there? Sorry, everyone, a little bit of technical difficulty here. While we give him a moment to get back on the line. Oh, he's there.
based on, you still?
We lost you for just a moment, John, but you're back. Apologies. Could you reiterate for us? Sorry about that.
So, right, I'll just go back to the beginning of my discussion. The importance on the requirements for the MDR and Ivdr basically come down to the dates for compliance with the requirement, and these are based on a decreasing risk class order for each case. So they are at 1, 3, and 5 year intervals after the date of applicability for both the MDR and the Ivdr. The date of applicability for the MDR is currently set in May of 2021, and that for the Ivdr is currently set for May of 2022. So as I showed in one of our slides, there's an alternating year of order in the dates that each risk class will be affected by the dates of applicability for those body requirements. The only other significance between the two regulations is the aspect of the numbering of articles that are called out in the regulation, but that's not a really substantial difference between them.
Thank you so much for pointing those out. Certainly appreciate it. Moving right along, Diana, what are the requirements for Prrc in terms of experience? We know that John had touched on this just a bit in the presentation, but if you could speak to us, what are the requirements for Prrc in terms of experience?
Okay, well, the Prrc is the person responsible for regulatory compliance, and the MDR requires that that person has the requisite expertise in the field of medical devices, and they feel that can be demonstrated in either of these following ways. And I'm going to read their language directly just to make sure that it's clear. That person would need to have a diploma, certificate, or other evidence of formal qualification awarded on completion of a university degree or of a course of study recognized as equivalent by the member state concerned in law, medicine, pharmacy, engineering, or other relevant scientific discipline, and at least 1 year of professional experience in regulatory affairs or in quality management systems relating to medical devices. In the event that the person doesn't have that diploma, certificate, or other evidence of formal qualification, it would be acceptable if the individual had 4 years of professional experience in regulatory affairs or quality management systems related to medical devices. So it's either a degree in 1 year or at least 4 years. But Article 15 does offer some relief to smaller enterprises because in terms of needing to have somebody on staff, you're actually exempt from having a Prrc on staff as an employee at the close of your most recent accounting period, you had fewer than 50 full-time global employees and under 10 million euros in global revenue. So there's that option that it can be outsourced, but obviously that person does need to meet the qualifications that are stated there in the regulation that I mentioned a few minutes ago.
Thank you so much. To our attendees, if you could just remain muted, we'd certainly appreciate that. But thank you so much to Diana for that perspective. John, another great question here for you, moving right along. If you are a company that plans to market in both the US and the EU, how should you plan to navigate exemptions in the US that would not be compliant in the EU and vice versa? For example, a data matrix that fits on the product but not the HRI. So again, looking, John, a company that wants to market in both the EU and the US, how should you plan to navigate exemptions in the US that would not be compliant in the EU and vice versa?
So that's a good question, and there are a lot of parts to it. A careful look at the various different regulations indicates, yes, there are exceptions, like for instance, in the US, you can market a retail point of sale device that allows you to put on the label the AIDC DI element without the PI element, but it still requires the human readable. So, in that instance, yes, you can, maybe save a little bit of space. That kind of runs afoul of most organizations that want to try to achieve, a worldwide similarity for their labeling. I mean, jurisdiction-specific labeling is something that labeling departments kind of avoid if they can. Having said that, you could choose to have different labels if you choose. That's one way to go. But I think that the sense of the question kind of comes down to effective use of space. So one thing you can do is essentially look into technological solutions. You certainly can, you can look to make your label larger. You can also look at things like decreasing font sizes and shrinking the size of your various different fonts represented on the label. And you can also consider things like your UDI and HRI, well, your UDI elements, it's allowable for them to be broken up into 2 different blocks. It's also allowable to use these 2D data matrices that are more compact than a barcode. So that could be a good way to look into saving space. So I get the feeling that most of the focus of that question kind of comes down to an effective use of space and most efficient means of doing that. So those are probably the most obvious ways that I would consider the strategy.
Great insight. Thank you so much for that, John. Moving right along, Diana, great question for you. Since EUDAMED is delayed another year, which database or site should be used for medical device clinical trial registrations in the EU?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, yes. Right now, there are independent systems that are being used, and the expectation is that these are going to continue to be used until the EUDAMED module for the clinical trials is ready, so that it will, through that module, the single identification number will be assigned for clinical investigations. But until that's ready, we will use, I mean, it's acceptable to use the World Health Organization's International Clinical Trials Registry platform, ICTRP, and each member state does require a unique study ID and registration on a public site, and the ones that are generally accepted would include clinicaltrials.gov. There is a Germany clinical trial database, DRKS. There's the Netherlands trial registry, and there's also a European clinical trial registry that was originally developed for medicines, but device makers are not precluded from using it. Just recognize that it might seem a little awkward because there are some pretty big differences when you're doing a drug versus a medical device. But and due to the lack of harmonization between these suggested databases, each country might have a preference, so you may want to check that as well. But for now, it's continue doing what we're doing until that module is ready.
Thank you for that advice, Diana. Appreciate that. Another question that we have, are there IT support resources available for the database? Diana, if you could speak to this, any IT resources, IT support resources available for the database?
Well, on the Commission's website, you will find some really great material to help your staff to understand the scope of the project and so forth. There's a data dictionary, there's some functional specs and some things like that. But if you want to speak to somebody directly, the website recommends that you write to them on their website. There is a template or a form that you can use to write to them directly, or they do have phone numbers and you can call. They do promise to respond within 3 days if you write to them. Within the EU, you can call them at 00800 678 91011. And outside of the EU, the phone number isn't quite as easy to remember, but it's 0032 22 99 9696. And of course, you can find resources available just by Googling they're out there that can assist, obviously for a fee, but some really wonderful expertise out there, because truly the Commission themselves are not going to be able to fully staff enough IT resources once we do roll this out, because there's probably at least 80,000 registrations that have to be processed. And so we appreciate the fact that other companies are stepping up and helping by becoming experts themselves and consulting to medical device companies. So I can't recommend any specific company, but I know there's some wonderful ones out there. Or you can try to contact the EC directly, the European Commission.
Lovely. Thank you so much for your insight on that, Diana. Much appreciated. Another question that we have here for you, Diana, are there certain areas that may represent a risk to companies in terms of potential litigation or penalties? Another great question. So if you know of any offhand, are there certain areas that may represent a risk to companies in terms of potential litigation or penalties?
Well, the regulation itself is law now in Europe, or it will be when it takes full effect. So from a legal standpoint, it will be enforced there, but additional litigation concerns that companies will face, outside of the European Union would include, attorneys today, they can and they will subpoena complaint records and other post-market data that's made available to the public. So anything that is uploaded to that website, there will be a lot more eyes looking at it. Not everything will be made public, but even those things that are not made fully public, they will have more internal actors that are reviewing it. And part of the EU MDR effectiveness is they are requiring every actor along the way to do a lot of checks to make sure that what is being brought into the country is safe for patients and that they have the traceability in the event that there are any concerns about what's out there. So it's just, you may want special training for any of the individuals that are responsible for entering or uploading the data to EUDAMED. You want to be sensitive to the fact that more and more people will be looking at it, and you don't want information to be misconstrued, so you need to be careful. Don't put too much information, but you do need to put all the, just the facts. And be accurate and as complete as possible without being too wordy. You don't want to add extra information that could be misconstrued or bring more questions and answers. So having excellent writing skills will be very important to anyone entering the data into EUDAMED to help to mitigate risks of litigation.
Thank you so much for your insight on that, Diana. We appreciate it. And we've got time for one last question here. Another great question that came through. What in the EUDAMED database will be public facing? For example, it seems the summary of safety and clinical performance documents as needed for higher risk devices will be public. But what else? Will the notified body certificates be public facing so that users can confirm valid CE marking? And we're going to have another colleague jump on the line, but again, the question is, what in the EUDAMED database will be public facing?
Okay, so I can briefly mention, yes, it includes the summaries of safety and clinical performance. Clearly, the database that will be the designation of the various notified bodies and the regulations for which they're designated. The only other thing that I can think maybe an area would be where they have public health information that they like to make available in order to help prevent, full-blown public health problems. Like, for instance, there is a immediate public health concern about a particular device out there on the market. Something like that might be made public, but they certainly haven't detailed exactly how that might be done. Or it's going to be a wait and see thing.
Yeah, some of the other items that will be publicly available would be all the IFUs, the instructions for use, the implant cards, the patient information leaflets that are distributed with the implants and with other high-risk devices. So all of that will be available, and people will be able to compare across companies. The public will. So again, you'll want documents that are easy on the eyes and that are presenting the most relevant information in a way that is going to be useful for the users. So, and as far as the post-market surveillance complaint data, some of those fields will be made available to the public. I don't know exactly which ones, but not all the details that are entered will be available. So I guess, we'll learn more as we get closer to the actual release date. But those are the ones I know of that are going to be available to the public.
Okay, and did we have one more colleague who was going to chime in on that? Sharma, are you there? Okay, maybe not. Well, thank you so much again to our Celegence panel. Really appreciate you providing this great insight. I know we're a little over time, so I do want to thank all of our attendees again for investing your time with us today. Thank you again for submitting your questions and comments. Again, the Celegence team, who is excellent, I've been working with them for some time now, will be following up on those additional questions submitted. This is a topic that we could spend quite some time on, so we do appreciate, again, all of the registered attendees submitting your questions and comments in advance and then participating today as well. We will be in touch with a copy of the presentation recording and also just a brief survey to get everyone's feedback on today's presentation and topic. But thank you again to all of our attendees, and truly a big, big thank you again to today's sponsor, Celegence, and their team members, John Bradsher, who is the medical device regulatory affairs and quality assurance expert, who was joined by his colleague Diana Taylor, who is also a QA and regulatory compliance expert. Also Dylan Mulvihill. Dylan, truly been a pleasure working with you and your team. We thank you so much for not only making the time to be with us today and share your expertise, but really providing some detailed answers here. Really appreciate the insight and look forward to what's to come from the Celegence team.
Thank you so much. Thanks again, Brooke.
Anytime.
Thank you for everyone for joining today.
I know there were a few people on the phone as well. If you were unable to submit questions, please feel free to directly to my email to webinars@q1productions.com, and I'll make sure that I get them over to our Celegence team. But thank you so much again to everyone. Be safe and be well. Have a lovely day, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.